Hey, my name is Caleb Shaw. I'm a mobile mechanic. I've spent the last 10 years alone driving from farm to farm, fixing other people's machines and disappearing before roots can form. Last spring, a widow named Anna called me out to her place. Her husband had died and the tractor had been dead ever since. I spent the afternoon under it, replacing lines, cleaning carbs. When I was done, her three identical daughters, maybe 6 years old, finally approached. The smallest one tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Mister, Mama made a bed for you." I froze. The words didn't make sense. She explained in a child's earnest way that their mother had turned the old guest room into a proper bedroom months ago. Fresh sheets, a quilt her grandmother made in 1912, and a promise. It was for the man who would come fix the tractor. Anna appeared in the doorway, face flushed with embarrassment, but her eyes held a question she couldn't voice. I'd come to earn $100. I stayed for supper, and when I left that night, I knew I'd be back before sunrise. But that bed was only the beginning. What I found inside that house would force me to confront the question I'd been running from for a decade. Can a man with no roots ever truly belong anywhere? I drove my truck back onto the gravel road that night with the taste of Anna's stew still warm on my tongue. The sun had set, leaving only a thin orange line on the horizon. I'd taken jobs in 100 farmhouses over the years, but never once had I been invited to stay for supper. The money was always handed through a cracked door or left on a fence post, and I'd always preferred it that way. No strings, no obligations, no goodbyes that hurt. But as I pulled onto the empty highway, I couldn't stop hearing that little girl's voice in my head. "Mama made a bed for you. My name is Caleb Shaw." I'm 42 years old, and I've been living out of my pickup for longer than I care to admit. The sleeper cab has a mattress that's seen better days, a camping stove, and a plastic crate full of dog-eared paperbacks. I carry my tools in the back and my solitude like a second skin. I'm not from anywhere. My mother left when I was 12, and my father, a mechanic himself, raised me in a garage smelling of oil and disappointment. He died of a heart attack in a wheat field when I was 23, and I've been drifting ever since. I've never owned a house, never held a lease, never had a relationship that lasted longer than a season. I fix machines because machines don't ask you to stay. Machines don't prepare a room with a quilt from 1912 and hope you'll fill it. Anna Calloway's farm was one I'd passed a dozen times and never noticed. 160 acres of corn and soybeans with a white farmhouse, a barn that listed slightly to the left, and a silo missing its hat. The tractor, a 1976 John Deere 2640, had been sitting dead since the day her husband Ben was buried. She told me that over the phone, her voice thin and tired, as if even talking about it drained something out of her. I quoted her a price, $100 labor plus parts. "I can't afford much," she'd said, "but I'll pay whatever it costs. I need that tractor running before planting season." When I arrived, I saw the yard was overgrown, the fences sagging, and a stack of unpaid bills pinned to the door with a magnet. But the vegetable garden by the house was neat and thriving, tomatoes staked with care, the lettuce rows perfectly straight. Someone had been holding things together with dental floss and prayer. Then I saw the girls. Three identical faces peering from the barn door, silent as owls. Lily, Rose, and Violet. I'd learned their names later. They were 6 years old, dressed in matching jean overalls, their hair the color of corn silk. They watched me work on the tractor without making a sound, whispering only to each other. I'd never seen triplets before. It felt like standing in front of a small, intense jury. While I worked, Anna brought me a glass of sweet tea. She was 29 but looked both older and younger at the same time. Her hands were rough from scrubbing and weeding, but her eyes, when she forgot to guard them, held a kind of hope that scared me. She told me a little about Ben. "A good man," she said, "the kind who'd give you his last dollar and then apologize it wasn't more. He'd bought the farm with his brother, but his brother had pulled out years ago, leaving Ben with the full mortgage. The accident had happened 2 summers past, a grain auger that jammed and then suddenly didn't. She didn't say more and I didn't push. I knew that look of grief that sits just under the surface, always ready to spill. I finished the tractor just as the sun started dipping low. I replaced the fuel lines, rebuilt the carburetor, dropped in a new battery, and when I turned the key, the old engine coughed once and then roared to life. The sound echoed across the fields like a resurrection. The triplets cheered from the barn. Anna put her hand over her mouth and cried. That's when the smallest one, Violet, tugged my sleeve and spoke the words that turned everything sideways. "Mister, Mama made a bed for you." Later, at supper, Anna tried to explain. She'd been preparing the room for months, she said, not for me specifically, but for someone. She'd prayed every night that God would send help, send a person who could fix not just the tractor but the thousand small things that were falling apart. She tried hearing hands, but they'd all left after a week, saying the farm was too far gone or that a woman alone was too much trouble. So she started getting a room ready, an act of faith. When I answered her ad, she didn't dare to hope. The triplets, though, had made their own conclusions. They decided I was the man their mother had been waiting for. I didn't sleep that night. I parked my truck at a rest stop 20 miles away, but my mind kept circling the same thing. I'd been alone for 10 years, and I'd convinced myself I was fine with it. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was just numb. And now a woman I barely knew and three small girls who believed in things they couldn't see had reached through that numbness and grabbed hold of something I thought was dead. I drove back to the farm before sunrise, as I'd known I would. Anna was already on the porch, wrapped in an old coat as if she'd been waiting. She didn't look surprised. She only asked, "You came back?" I said, "The tractor might need adjustments." We both knew that wasn't the real reason. Over the next few days, I stayed. I fixed the sagging fence, patched the barn roof, and helped her plant the lower field. I slept in the guest room, the one the triplets had spoken of, with its quilt and its window facing east toward the sunrise. It smelled like cedar and something floral. I hadn't slept in a real bed in years. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up somewhere that wasn't a parking lot or the side of a highway. But Caleb, the man who kept his engine running, was still watching for the catch. And it didn't take long to find it. One morning, I came in from the fields to find a black SUV parked in the drive. A man in a pressed shirt and expensive boots was standing on the porch, arguing with Anna. His voice was low but sharp, the kind of voice that's used to getting what it wants before anyone raises their voice. I heard him say, "You're not selling, but you don't have a choice, Anna. Ben's debts didn't die with him, and neither did my patience." Anna saw me and her face went pale. She whispered, "Caleb, this is Ben's brother Derek. He wants the farm." Derek turned and looked me over like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto his property. He smiled without any warmth. "You the mechanic. Fix the tractor and leave. This is family business." I glanced at Anna. She was shaking, not from cold but from a fear that had been living here long before I arrived. And I knew right then that the bed and the quilt and the little girl's whispered words were only the surface. The real story was buried deeper, and if I stayed, I'd have to dig it up. But leaving was no longer an option, because for the first time in 10 years, I had found something worth fighting for. The air went out of Anna like a punctured tire. She looked at me, then at Derek, and I saw something in her I hadn't noticed before, pure, exhausted defeat. She'd been fighting this man for 2 years alone and she was out of weapons, but I wasn't. I stepped up onto the porch, placing my body between Derek and Anna. My voice was calm, but I could feel the engine of my old anger starting to turn over. "The lady said she's not selling. I think that's the end of it." Derek's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat. He was mid-40s, handsome in a polished way, with the kind of tan that comes from golf courses, not farm work. He looked at me like I was a grease stain on his new shirt. "You've been here 3 days, mechanic. I've known this family my whole life. You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it," I said. "Because from where I'm standing, a widow and 3 little girls are about to lose their home to a man who drives a $60,000 SUV and wears boots that have never touched mud." Derek's jaw tightened. He shifted his gaze to Anna. "Is this really how you want to play it? Bringing in some drifter to fight your battles? The bank doesn't care about sentiment. The loan is due in 6 weeks, and unless you can pay it, this place goes to auction." Anna spoke, her voice trembling but finding its spine. "The loan was supposed to be covered by the crop insurance. You told Ben you'd handle it." "I did handle it," Derek said, "but the insurance money didn't cover everything. There were other debts, And after Ben died, the bank lost faith in this farm's future. They want their money, not promises. I watched Anna's face. Something wasn't adding up. How much? I asked. Derek looked at me with open contempt. $84,000. You got that in your toolbox. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I didn't think so. Look, Anna, I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to help. If you sell to me privately, you walk away with something. If the bank takes it, you get nothing. The girls get nothing. Anna didn't answer. The triplets had come out of the barn and were standing at the edge of the yard, watching with those large, solemn eyes. Derek saw them too, and for just a moment something flickered across his face. Not guilt, impatience. Then he turned and climbed into his SUV. He rolled down the window. 6 weeks, he said. Think about it. The engine purred and he was gone, leaving a cloud of dust that settled slowly over the yard. That evening, after the girls were asleep, Anna and I sat at the kitchen table. She poured 2 cups of coffee and told me everything. Ben and Derek had bought the farm together 15 years ago, but Derek had never been interested in farming. He'd wanted the land for its development potential, a housing subdivision, maybe a strip mall. Ben had refused, so Derek sold his share back to Ben, but the terms were predatory. He'd structured the buyout as a personal loan with a balloon payment, using the farm itself as collateral. When Ben died, that loan became Anna's problem. But it gets worse, Anna said, her hands wrapped around her cup. The grain auger that killed Ben was supposed to have been inspected the week before. The safety shield was missing. The emergency shutoff had been bypassed. Ben was careful with equipment. He would never have bypassed a safety. I leaned forward. You're saying someone tampered with it. I don't know what I'm saying. Her voice cracked. The sheriff ruled it an accident, case closed, but I found a work order in the barn a month after the funeral. It was from Derek's construction company, dated 3 days before Ben died. It showed a repair on the auger motor. Derek had no reason to be on our equipment. The room felt suddenly colder. I'd spent my whole career around dangerous machinery. I knew how easy it was for a man to die when a single bolt was loose or a single wire was cut. The difference between an accident and a murder could be invisible to anyone not looking for it. Did you tell the sheriff? I asked. Anna shook her head. I didn't find it until after the case was closed. And by then, what proof did I really have? Derek would just say he was helping his brother. He'd say I was a grieving widow making wild accusations. He'd use it to take the girls away from me somehow. I was alone. I had no one. But she wasn't alone anymore. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time I'd initiated touch in years. Her fingers were cold, but they held on. The next week, I started digging. I called a buddy of mine, a retired cop from Des Moines named Frank, who owed me a favor from the time I'd fixed his boat engine in the middle of a storm. I told him about the auger, the work order, the balloon payment. Frank listened without interrupting, then whistled low. Sounds like you've waded into a mess, Caleb. That brother-in-law of hers has a reputation. He's been sued twice for contract fraud, settled both times out of court. He owes money all over the county. If he's desperate enough, he might have done something stupid, but proving it after 2 years, that's a long shot. Still, I asked him to pull whatever records he could. Property liens, lawsuits, insurance claims. Then I started asking around in town. The diner on Main Street, the feed store, the bar where farmers gathered after sunset. People were willing to talk, but only in whispers. Derek Calloway had his fingers in a lot of pies. He'd loaned money to struggling families and then called in the debts when they couldn't pay. He'd bought up 3 foreclosed properties in the last year alone. People were afraid of him. One old farmer named Gus Mitchell pulled me aside in the hardware store parking lot. He was 83, with hands like burled wood and eyes that had seen too much. "You're the mechanic staying out at Anna's place," he said. It wasn't a question. I knew Ben since he was a boy. He was a good man, but he trusted the wrong people. His brother Derek, that one's rotten to the core. Ben told me once that Derek had taken out a life insurance policy on him, said it was just business in case something happened. Ben laughed about it. He thought it was a joke. I felt my blood go still. A life insurance policy? Gus nodded slowly. A big one, $500,000. Ben told me he never signed it, but Derek had papers with his signature anyway. Ben was going to challenge it, but then the accident happened. That night I called Frank again and asked him to check for life insurance claims filed by Derek Calloway after Ben's death. 2 days later he called back. His voice was tight. "I found it, Caleb. A policy for $500,000 taken out 6 months before Ben died. The beneficiary is Derek Calloway. And get this, the policy paid out 3 weeks after the accident. Derek collected $500,000, but the farm's loan was never reduced by a dime." I stood in the barn, staring at the old John Deere I'd fixed, the tractor that had brought me here that had been dead for 2 years while Derek bled Anna dry. He'd gotten $500,000 for his brother's death, and he still wanted the farm. He wanted everything. The triplets found me standing there. Lily, the boldest one, walked up and tugged my sleeve the way Violet had on that first day. "Mr. Caleb," she said, "why are you sad?" I knelt down so I could look her in the eye. "I'm not sad, sweetheart, I'm angry, and I need you to promise me something. You and your sisters stay close to the house from now on. No wandering off to the barn without your mama, okay?" Lily nodded, her face serious. "Is the bad man coming back?" I didn't know how to answer that, because Derek wasn't just coming back. If what I was starting to suspect was true, he'd already done far worse than any bad man they could imagine. And if he found out I was digging into his business, he'd have no reason to stop at one brother. That night the warning came. I woke at 3 in the morning to the smell of smoke. Not the comforting smoke of a wood stove, but the sharp chemical smell of gasoline. I threw open my window and saw flames licking up the side of the barn. The hayloft was already blazing. I shouted for Anna and ran outside barefoot. The triplets were still in the house. Anna appeared on the porch, her face white in the firelight. "The animals!" she screamed. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the shed, but it was too little. The flames were roaring now, eating through the old dry wood. Then I saw something that turned my fear into ice. A figure was standing at the edge of the field, silhouetted against the fire. Not running, not calling for help, just watching. And in the flickering light, I saw the glint of a black SUV parked on the road behind him. I didn't sleep that night. The fire burned for 2 hours before the volunteer crew from town got it contained. By then, the hayloft was gone, the east wall had collapsed, and 14 chickens had suffocated in the smoke. The cows survived. The tractor, my tractor now, stood blackened but intact, like a stubborn monument to everything Derek Calloway had failed to destroy. Anna stood beside me in the cold morning light, her arms wrapped around the triplets, all 4 of them in matching soot-streaked pajamas. She didn't cry. She'd moved past tears into something harder. "He's never going to stop," she said quietly. "Even if we pay the loan, he'll find another way. He'll take the girls. He'll burn the house. He'll do whatever it takes." I watched the black SUV's tire tracks in the mud at the edge of the field. The sheriff had already been out here, poking around with a flashlight and a yawn, taking notes he'd probably lose before he got back to his car. His name was Harlan Briggs, a man who'd been sheriff for 30 years and whose campaign sign still dotted Derek Calloway's front lawn. He'd pronounced the fire suspicious but inconclusive and promised to file a report. I knew what that meant. Nothing. So I started making calls of my own. First to Frank, my retired cop in Des Moines. I told him about the fire, about the SUV, about the stolen $500,000 and the bypass safety on the auger. Frank listened to it all and then said the one thing I'd been dreading to hear. "Caleb, you're in over your head. Accusing a man like Derek Calloway without hard evidence is a good way to end up dead in a ditch. But if you can get me something solid, something a prosecutor can use, I'll bring it to the state's attorney myself." Hard evidence. That was the key. I stood in the smoldering wreckage of the barn and started looking. For an hour I sifted through ash and twisted metal, cutting my hands on nails and splinters. Then, buried under a fallen beam, I found it. A red plastic gas can, half melted but still recognizable. The nozzles on those cans are distinctive, the kind sold at the hardware store that Derek's construction company used for their generators. And on the bottom, a faded property tag. "Calloway Construction, property of DC." I wrapped it in a tarp and locked it in the cab of my truck. That was the first domino. The second came that afternoon when Anna appeared in the kitchen doorway holding a dusty cardboard box I'd never seen before. Her face was pale but composed. "I kept this in the attic," she said. "Ben's papers. I couldn't look at them after he died, but this morning I thought maybe there's something in here that can help. We spent 3 hours going through every scrap, bills, receipts, letters from the bank. And then near the bottom, a folded sheet of paper with a phone number written in Ben's handwriting and a single word, insurance. Anna stared at it. That's not my handwriting, that's Ben's. He must have written it down right before. She couldn't finish. But I was already dialing the number. It rang 5 times before a woman answered, cheery and professional. Midwest Life and Casualty, this is Peggy, how can I help you? I identified myself as an insurance investigator, which wasn't entirely a lie, and asked about policy number 44721. The woman put me on hold for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then her voice returned, cooler now. I'm sorry, sir, but that policy was paid out to the beneficiary 2 years ago. The claim was processed in full. Is there a dispute? I asked who the beneficiary was. She said, Derek Calloway, brother of the deceased. Then, before I could stop myself, I asked the question that would break everything open. Were there any other policies on Ben Calloway or on his family? Silence. Then a guarded tone. I'm not at liberty to discuss other policies without proper authorization. But I didn't need her to say it. Her hesitation told me everything. Derek hadn't just insured Ben. He'd insured all of them. Anna, the triplets, the whole family. A $500,000 payout on one death was just the beginning. If something happened to Anna or to one of the girls, Derek stood to collect again. Anna had been listening on speakerphone. When the line went dead, she sank into a chair like the bones had been pulled out of her legs. He was never going to let us live, she whispered. Even if we paid the loan, even if we gave him the farm, we were worth more to him dead. That was the moment the story shifted. Not just a greedy brother trying to steal a farm. Not just a cruel man who'd bypassed a safety shield and called it an accident. Derek Calloway had placed a price tag on the lives of a woman and 3 little girls, and he'd already collected on one of them. The fire hadn't been a warning. It had been a test, and we'd failed it by surviving. We needed more than a gas can and a phone call. We needed proof that could stand up in court, and we needed it fast. The auction was now 5 weeks away, but with the barn gone and Derek's influence in town, the bank could call the loan early. We were running out of time. The third domino fell through a man named Leonard Haas. He'd been a foreman for Calloway Construction for 12 years, then got fired 6 months before Ben died. He was 71 now, living in a trailer park outside of Newton with an oxygen tank and a terminal case of emphysema. When I knocked on his door, he looked at me like he'd been expecting someone for a long time. You're the mechanic, he said, voice rattling like gravel in a pipe. Derek's been talking about you, says you're a problem. I'm about to become a bigger one. I sat down across from him in a room that smelled of menthol and regret. Mr. Haas, I think you know things about Derek Calloway that no one else does. I think you got fired because you wouldn't play along. And I think you've been waiting for the right person to ask. Leonard stared at me for a long time. Then he reached under his chair and pulled out a battered cassette recorder. I taped everything, he said. Every meeting, every phone call. I was going to use it as insurance in case he tried to hurt me, but my lungs are giving out and I've got nothing left to lose. He pressed play. Derek's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. I need you to loosen the bolts on the auger's safety shield. Just enough so it looks like normal wear. You'll get $5,000 cash and nobody gets hurt. Leonard's voice replied, shaking. That could kill someone, Derek. And then Derek laughed. The sound of it, even through the cheap speaker, made my stomach turn. My brother's got a $500,000 policy, Derek said. That's my money, and I'm going to collect it one way or another. The recording cut off. I had the gas can, the insurance phone call, and now a confession on tape. What Leonard told me next was even worse. Derek had a partner inside the bank, a loan officer named Marlene Stokes who'd been falsifying documents to accelerate the foreclosure. She was the one pushing the early auction, filing reports that the farm was non-viable, that Anna was in default. Marlene got a cut of every property Derek acquired. She was supposed to be in town tomorrow morning to finalize the paperwork and set a new auction date 3 weeks from now. Everything was accelerating. If Marlene filed that paperwork, the farm would be locked into a death spiral that no tape recording could unwind. We had to act before the bank opened. We had less than 18 hours. I called Frank one more time and played the recording over the phone. He said 3 words, "I'm coming down." Then I called Gus Mitchell, the old farmer who'd known Ben since boyhood, and told him to spread the word. Quietly. There'd be a meeting at the town hall in the morning before the bank opened. Anyone who'd been cheated by Derek, anyone who'd lost land or money or pride, was invited to come. Anna and I would present what we had and we'd march to the bank together. That night we sat around the kitchen table. The triplets were asleep upstairs, guarded by a loaded shotgun I'd borrowed from Gus. Anna held my hand across the table, and I saw a light in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not hope exactly, but resolve. The quilt on the guest bed, the one Anna's grandmother had stitched in 1912, was folded over the back of my chair. She'd put it there that morning, a quiet signal that the bed wasn't just for a man who fixed tractors anymore. It was for a man who stayed. "Tomorrow it ends," Anna said. "Either he goes down or we lose it all." I squeezed her hand. "We're not losing anything. That farm is yours. Those girls are yours, and I'm not going anywhere." She looked at me then, and in the quiet of that kitchen, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the distant threat of violence, we made an unspoken promise. Whatever came next, we'd face it side by side. The mechanic who'd spent 10 years running from roots had finally planted himself in ground worth defending. But outside, the wind had shifted. Somewhere in the darkness, an engine turned over. Headlights swept across the field and then killed. And on the porch, a floorboard creaked under the weight of a foot that didn't belong to anyone in that house. I grabbed the shotgun from the corner and motioned Anna to the floor. She moved without a sound, flattening herself against the pantry door, her eyes locked on mine. The creak came again, closer now, the heavy step of a man who wasn't trying to hide anymore. I pressed my back against the wall beside the kitchen door and thumbed the safety off. The door swung open. A figure filled the frame. It was Harlan Briggs, the sheriff, but the look on his face wasn't duty, it was threat. Behind him, half lit by the moon through the window, stood Derek Calloway. "Evening, mechanic," Derek said. "You've been a busy boy. Sheriff here tells me you've been making phone calls, asking questions about insurance policies and auger parts." Harlan stepped aside so Derek could enter. "Put the gun down, son," Harlan said. "No need for anyone to get hurt. We're just here to talk." Mr. Calloway is willing to be reasonable. You hand over the tape and the gas can and we all forget about this. Anna walks away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Anna rose from the floor, her voice trembling but not breaking. "You killed Ben. You burned my barn. You had a policy on my daughters. You think I'll just walk away?" Derek's patience snapped. "I think you don't have a choice. Your little mechanic is way out of his league. I own this county. The sheriff, the bank, the judge. You've got nothing." That's when the headlights hit the yard. A dozen of them, then 2 dozen, flooding the windows with white light. Doors slammed. Voices rose. Gus Mitchell's gravelly shout cut through the night. "Sheriff, step out here. We got something to discuss." Harlan's face went slack. Derek spun toward the door and saw what was coming. It wasn't just Gus. It was half the town. Farmers in worn boots and feed caps. Women in winter coats thrown over nightgowns. Men holding tire irons and pitchforks. And at the front, Frank, my retired cop friend, with a state prosecutor named Eleanor Vance beside him. Frank had driven through the night and brought the cavalry. Eleanor stepped onto the porch and held up a document. "Sheriff Briggs, I have a warrant for the arrest of Derek Calloway on charges of felony insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and arson. I also have a subpoena for bank records of Marlene Stokes. And if you don't lower your weapon and step aside, I'll add obstruction to the list." Harlan looked at Derek, then at the sea of faces outside. The calculation was instant. He set his shotgun against the wall and raised his hands. "I'm just an elected official trying to keep the peace," he said, but nobody believed him. Derek made a move. He lunged toward Anna, maybe to grab her, maybe to run. I stepped into his path and slammed the butt of the shotgun into his chest. He crumpled to the kitchen floor, gasping. "That's for Ben," I said, "and for the chickens." 2 deputies who'd followed Eleanor into the yard cuffed Derek and led him away. Harlan was placed under investigation and later resigned. By sunrise, the bank had been notified and the auction date suspended pending review. Gus Mitchell organized a bucket brigade to finish cleaning up the barn debris. Someone brought coffee and cinnamon rolls. It felt less like a victory and more like waking from a long, shared nightmare. The next weeks were a blur of paperwork and hearings. The recording Leonard Haas had made was deemed admissible. Derek's insurance claims were frozen. Marlene Stokes turned state's evidence to save herself, admitting that Derek had paid her to falsify the farm's financials and push the foreclosure. The life insurance policies on Anna and the triplets were voided. And the $500,000 Derek had collected for Ben's death was ordered returned to the estate to Anna. A judge exonerated Anna's loan, ruling it predatory and tied to fraud. With the insurance money restored, she was able to pay off the remaining legitimate debts and keep the farm free and clear. I watched her sign the final papers at the county clerk's office, the triplets in matching blue dresses beside her. Lily grabbed my hand. Rose grabbed the other. Violet just pressed her face into my leg and whispered, "You fixed it." But I hadn't fixed anything. I just refused to leave. And that refusal, simple as it was, had changed everything. Summer rolled across the Iowa fields in waves of gold and green. I stayed through planting, through the first harvest without Ben, through the long evenings when Anna and I would sit on the porch and watch the sun bleed into the corn. I rebuilt the barn with my own hands, using timber from Gus's mill and a set of plans I found in Ben's workshop. The triplets painted a sign for the new door, Callaway Farm S 1903 rebuilt 2024. They hung it crooked, but it was perfect. One evening, after the last of the wheat was in, Anna found me in the barn, hand on the old John Deere, the same tractor that had started all of this. She carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you," she said. "Open it." Inside was a quilt, not the one from the guest room. That one still lay on the bed where I slept every night with Anna beside me now. This quilt was new, stitched by Anna and the triplets over the past months. It showed the farm, the tractor, the barn, and four small figures standing under a maple tree. A woman, three identical girls, and a man with grease on his hands. I couldn't speak. She touched my scarred knuckles and said, "You told me once you'd spent 10 years running. I want you to know this is the end of the road. Not because there's nowhere left to run, but because you're home." I'd come to fix a tractor and earn $100. Instead, I found a woman who'd prepared a bed for a man she'd never met. Three little girls who saw a mechanic and decided he was an answer to prayer. And a whole town ready to fight for what was right when someone finally stood up and asked. Derek Callaway was sentenced to 15 years for fraud and conspiracy. Leonard Haas lived another 6 months, long enough to see the farm saved. He told me once that he'd never thought his final act on earth would be pressing play on a tape recorder, but he died proud. I attended his funeral with Anna and the girls. There were only 11 people there. One of them was Gus, who told me later, "You did what Lenny couldn't, son. You finished it." And somewhere in the middle of all that, I realized the simple truth that had been waiting for me since the day a little girl whispered 4 words. "Mama made a bed for you." It wasn't just a bed with fresh sheets and a grandmother's quilt. It was an invitation to stop being a ghost passing through other people's lives. It was a home built by hope and desperation, and it was mine if I was brave enough to step inside. I didn't fix that farm. The farm fixed me. And every morning when I wake up in that room facing east, the sun hits that crooked patchwork quilt, and I remember, sometimes the thing that's broken isn't the tractor. It's the man turning the key. People ask me now if I believe in signs. In prayers whispered over empty beds and quilts stitched a century before a stranger's truck rolled down a gravel road. I'm a mechanic. I believe in torque specs and compression ratios. But I also know that Anna's grandmother couldn't have known the exact shade of blue I'd favor, or that the window in that room would face the sunrise I've watched from 100 parking lots and never once called beautiful until I saw it from that bed. She couldn't have known, and yet she made it anyway. Maybe that's what faith is, preparing a place for something you can't prove is coming. The farm is thriving now. The triplets are 7, and last week Lily asked me if I'd teach her how to change a fuel filter. Rose wants to drive the tractor. Violet still whispers her most important thoughts as if the world isn't quite ready to hear them yet. Anna is pregnant. A boy due in March. We're naming him Ben. I've never been a father, never imagined I would be. But the girls have already started calling me Dad, not Mr. Caleb, and I've stopped correcting them. Some titles you earn. Some you simply accept as gifts you didn't know you needed. I still think about that first night, driving away with the taste of stew on my tongue, convinced I'd just completed another job and nothing more. How close I came to never turning around. One different choice, one old habit of running obeyed, and I'd still be out there, fixing other people's machines and sleeping in a truck cab that smells like oil and loneliness. Instead, I sleep beside a woman who saw a man covered in grease and decided he was an answer to prayer. I wake to the sound of 3 identical laughs and the smell of coffee and the knowledge that I am stayable. That word isn't in any repair manual I've ever read, but it's the one that rebuilt me. Here's the thing no one tells you about brokenness. It's not a permanent condition. A tractor can sit dead for 2 years and roar back to life. A barn can burn to the ground and be raised again with new timber and willing hands. A man can spend a decade running from every connection that might hurt him and still find his way home. The parts don't have to be perfect. They just have to be present. And sometimes, the only repair required is the courage to stay long enough for the engine to turn over. If this story found you in a moment where you're not sure whether to stay or go, whether the thing that's broken can ever run again, I hope you'll remember Anna's bed, the quilt, the little girl's whisper. Someone somewhere is preparing a place for you, and when you find it, don't drive away. Walk inside. The door is already open. Thank you for watching. If this meant something to you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's not too late to come home.